Breaking tonight, we now have the final DOJ report on the shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, and the Ferguson Department's and the Justice Department's 6-month investigation of the Ferguson PD. Former police officer Darren Wilson was also investigated. And the conclusion is, after assigning dozens of investigators, they said up to 40 FBI agents, Attorney General Eric Holder found that the Ferguson Police Department has some problems. But Officer Darren Wilson is not one of them. Trace Gallagher live in our West Coast newsroom with more. Trace?
Megan, the report is 85 pages long. In it, the Department of Justice makes it very clear that Officer Darren Wilson's account of what happened is credible, and the eyewitness accounts that refute Wilson's story are not credible. The DOJ concludes that Michael Brown did attack Officer Wilson inside his police cruiser, did not have his hands up before he was shot, did not say don't shoot, and was moving toward Officer Wilson before and during the shooting. Listen.
I recognize that the findings in our report may leave some to wonder how the department's findings can differ so sharply from some of the initial, widely reported accounts of what transpired.
Holder called those accounts alternate versions of events, but went on to say those versions are the result of a deeply polarized community with deep distrust between the residents and police. Holder accused Ferguson police of violating the rights of black citizens by stopping drivers without reasonable suspicion and making arrests without probable cause, saying blacks make up 67% of Ferguson's population but account for 93% of arrests. The investigation also uncovered racist emails from police and courthouse supervisors. In 2008, one email said President Obama wouldn't be president very long because, quote, what black man can hold a job for 4 years? Here's the Ferguson mayor.
We must do better, not only as a city, but as a state and a country. We must all work to address issues of racial disparity in all aspects of society.
Michael Brown's family said this about the DOJ report, quoting, while we are saddened by this decision, we are encouraged that the DOJ will hold the Ferguson Police Department for the pattern of racial bias and profiling. And tonight we have learned that Michael Brown's mom could now face charges for assaulting Michael Brown's grandmother. The grandmother was reportedly selling Michael Brown T-shirts, and the mom apparently didn't like it. Megan.
Trace, thank you. And Michael Brown's attorney was on another network tonight, continuing to suggest that Darren Wilson shot Michael Brown in part due to his racial animus. There's no evidence of that. Joining me now with more, Dana Lash, who's host of Dana on the Blaze TV and author of the new book, Hands Off My Gun. Mark Hanna is a Democratic campaign veteran and an adjunct professor of media studies at the New School. Dana, let me start with you. There are many problems, according to this report, with the Ferguson Police Department. But one of those problems is not Darren Wilson. And many are asking on his behalf tonight, where do you go to get your reputation back?
Yeah, that's a great question, Megan, and thanks so much for having me back. And with that, one of the things that Mayor James Knowles had mentioned with those emails that had been previously, that was in the earlier report, those officers, one had already been fired, two had already been suspended without pay as they investigated it. They took care of that without influence from the Department of Justice because they were policing their own. But you make a great point. What's left for Darren Wilson? He was already convicted in society. His life is over. How do you get that back? You can't.
You know, Mark, I looked through what Eric Holder now says about Darren Wilson. The eyewitnesses who said that he had his hands up, their accounts do not support a prosecution. They were inaccurate. They were inconsistent with the physical and forensic evidence. All stuff that the Ferguson prosecutor said, and everybody said, he's a hack. He can't be trusted. He goes on to say the evidence doesn't establish that it was unreasonable for Officer Wilson to perceive Brown as a threat. No credible evidence to refute Officer Wilson's subjective belief that he was acting in self-defense. Federal prosecutors found Wilson's account to be credible. The autopsy established Brown did not have gunshot wounds to his back. Multiple credible witnesses corroborate virtually every material aspect of Wilson's account and are consistent with physical evidence. This is from Eric Holder's DOJ.
Yes, it is. And all along, Eric Holder, regardless of what you think of him, he has said point blank that we are going to take us to where the facts lead. In this case, Officer Wilson has been cleared by the facts. I was on your show a couple months ago and said I don't suspect Officer Wilson is necessarily guilty of any kind of racist motive, but the reason these protests started isn't because of some misquote of, you know, hands up or don't shoot. The reason these protests went out into the people went out into the street is because there's a perception, and this is the investigation showed this.
Why do you discount that it was both of those things? That it was people like Al Sharpton out there stoking the fires, and
Megan,
separately, these terrible relations between the police force and the community.
Megan, you can say there was some bad behavior by the Ferguson Police Department. Bad behavior isn't going to really adequately describe. These were breaking the Constitution, breaking the law. There are good cops all around the country.
I'm not disputing that. But Dana, let me ask you. We've played the soundbite time after time of Al Sharpton out there saying this officer shot this unarmed man in no fear of his own bodily safety. Eric Holder has now looked at Al Sharpton and said, "Wrong, sir, wrong."
Yeah, I mean, to Holder's credit, which I never thought I would say. Look, St. Louis is my hometown. This is where I was born and raised. And I'm going to tell you something. People in the city of Ferguson, where I have a family member who did live before selling her house after all this happened, by the way, they had bussed people in on the premise of hands up, don't shoot. That was the mantra.
We saw
that was
on
the
the floor of
rallying
Congress.
cry for
we saw it on the floor of
months.
Congress.
Right, but what this report finds, Megan, finds is that there is a broad pattern of racist policing that gives all cops a bad name. Look, I grew up in a...
So that justifies this, Mark? What we saw?
It justifies...
all these folks with their hands up, don't shoot, which did not happen.
It justifies the investigation that happened, and Judge Napolitano, Fox News' own Judge Napolitano, showed when he was talking to Shep Smith earlier, he said...
No, you're moving the goalposts.
He basically... No, let me just finish, Dana, just let me finish my thought. What Judge Napolitano said was that the Department of Justice has a legal obligation under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution and is duty-bound to enforce these, to do this investigation. This investigation started 2 days after Michael Brown was killed. It didn't start after the throngs and throngs of protest and weeks of protest. It started 2 days because there was an apparent,
You're making Dana's point right now.
I'm making
You're making her point. If they had come in after the weeks of protest, then that would have been more understandable. What they did was, as soon as a white officer killed a black victim or decedent, he swooped in because he thought there was racial bias. And guess what, Dana? There wasn't.
And it's happening
That's what they concluded, that there wasn't.
Megan, that's right. Megan, this investigation was motivated on racial discrimination. The charge was, this was a civil rights investigation. The charge was from the DOJ. This is what they were investigating, whether or not Darren Wilson was acting in a racially discriminatory manner when he engaged Mike Brown. That was proven to be false. So now we're going to move the goalposts and say, okay, well, it wasn't Darren Wilson. But no. This case was about Darren Wilson, and he's been convicted. He is owed an apology.
Right. He's been convicted in the court of public opinion, or at least by some, and he's been acquitted by every legal body that's looked at it. I got to run,
He's been defended by you, Megan, and he could have no better public defender than you.
Well, I didn't defend him nor prosecute him.
I care about his reputation. I care about the reputation of cops more, though.
But I saw that the facts were missing. The facts to convict him were missing. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Dana.
Up next, the executive director of the NRA is here to warn about what he calls an Obama administration attempt at gun control by executive action. Watch this. Stand by.